Let's get back to the speech by China's vice president. And for more on that, we're joined by Neysun Mahboubi. He is a research scholar at the University of Pennsylvania's Center for Study of Contemporary China. Thanks very much for taking time to chat with us.
Hi, Sean.
I want to begin. It's good to see you. I want to begin by picking up on some of what Nathan said. Now, by many accounts, the speech by Vice President Han Zheng was very measured, and he did not use the United States by name, but key words echoed in these global speeches from China leaders in the past did come out. Again, a call to push back on Western values, power politics, unilateralism, as well as weaponizing human rights. Did the vice president find an embracing audience today?
And that's hard for me to judge. I do think that on the whole, this speech did not break substantial new ground in any of those terms and phrases that you mentioned. This is more or less the kind of speech that we've seen before. I think in the context of the U.S.-China relations part of this, the speech isn't the important part. The important part is the meeting that Secretary Blinken and Vice President Han Zheng had a few days ago, and of course the meeting between Foreign Minister Wang Yi and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in Malta a few days before that. The content of this speech, I don't think, is particularly important in that regard. What I thought was interesting about the speech was the way in which it tried to position China in the global south and as sort of a leader of the developing countries. In the context of this UN General Assembly, I think that's an interesting thing to think about and talk about. But the U.S.-China relations part of it, I think the real action is outside of the speech and more in these meetings that are occurring on the sidelines.
Well, let's pick up on some of those initiatives. Vice President Han talking about China's big three global initiatives: global security, global development, global civilizations. It's, again, a relatively short speech, only about 13 minutes, so not a lot of specifics, but it is important for China to get its message out there.
Yeah, and of those three, I think global security is the one that has caught a lot of attention of late. It does seem as if, especially in recent years, China has put a really large premium on its own domestic security, and it seems as if it is trying to take that mindset and put it as part of what other countries should be thinking about, and as China tries to position itself as a leader among other countries, especially developing countries, trying to suggest that they take security as seriously as China does. That's interesting. But I think also just on development more generally, the question that I think a lot of people puzzle over is how can a country that is a GDP of over $18 trillion a year count as a developing country? That's intellectually an interesting thing to think about.
Well, if you've been there, it's really two worlds, obviously, but I'm sure you have. Let's talk about President Xi Jinping and many other world leaders sitting this session out. How do you believe that is being viewed?
Yeah, it's interesting. My guess is that they each have different reasons. I doubt that they're all the same reason. Also, there's a lot of other meetings where the world leaders are seeing each other recently, including most of them, all but President Xi Jinping, saw each other at the G20 in India not long ago. There's going to be the APEC meeting in November, where we're anticipating that President Biden and President Xi will get to see each other. Why did the other members of the Security Council, they didn't show up? I think they probably each had their own reasons. I'm sure that Vladimir Putin had his own for very particular reasons that are not shared by the others. But I don't think that's particularly important. Of course, with the UNGA being in New York, it makes sense that President Biden went in person himself.
Let's also just talk about the security issues. I want to go back to that for just a second, because if I'm not mistaken, doesn't China have more peacekeeping forces out there than any other nation?
That I don't know about. I don't know if it could well be that China, in becoming more involved in the UN system generally, also has more peacekeeping forces. But I think it's fair to say that when China talks about global security, it's not so much referencing that aspect of what the UN does around the world, but more has to do with the very particular approach that China takes to security domestically, and suggesting that that kind of mindset and those approaches should be adopted by other countries.
Well said.
More, I think, that than something to do with peacekeeping forces.
Absolutely. Well said, my friend. Neighbor, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for taking time to chat with us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.